In the spring of 1978, when Deng Xiaoping was on his way to Nepal, he flew over the Tibet Plateau. From his plane, he gazed down at the land for a long time. The whole country was still recovering from the Cultural Revolution, and he was beginning to turn his thoughts to the Tibet Autonomous Region again. In the beginning of 1950, Deng Xiaoping, the Secretary of Southwest China, was assigned the task of liberating Tibet by the central government. Later, when the reform and opening up process was taking hold across the country, the Tibet Autonomous Region came into Deng Xiaoping's mind. He wanted to involve Tibet in the reform and opening up process. This photograph was taken in the 1980s. Deng Xiaoping invited the 10th Panchen Lama for a long conversation. Something Deng Xiaoping said to him during that visit made him very excited.
第一句话就说：“他说你是我们国家一个最好的爱国者。”
That meeting would be highly significant for the Panchen Lama, who had prepared a special gift for Deng Xiaoping.
他给小平同志按照这个藏族的这个传统，给小平同志这个送了一块这个大饼。 这个啊，就是最高的这个礼节啊！你看他有一张照片，就是给他比划，
At that time, the Panchen Lama was entrusted by Deng Xiaoping with promoting the central government's policies and helping to prepare the way for restoring order out of the chaos in the Tibet Autonomous Region. In July 1982, the 10th Panchen Lama returned to the Tibet Autonomous Region, and the reform and opening up policy was warmly welcomed by the Tibetan people. One day in the 1980s, Deng Xiaoping welcomed his old friend, former US President Jimmy Carter, who had just completed a trip to the Tibet Autonomous Region. Deng Xiaoping told him that as long as the people in Tibet benefited, development of the Tibet Autonomous Region would be promoted. Later, the remarks became a standard motto of development in the Tibet Autonomous Region. Based on Deng Xiaoping's theory, the first and second working conferences on Tibet were held by the central government in 1980 and 1984. Two long-term policies were raised during the conferences.
说长期不变的，就是说，从牧业来说，这个生育呢，就是归户了，自主经营啊，长期不变。自主经营，你愿意怎么放牧怎么这个，长期不变。农业呢，就是土地归户使用了，哎。 这个也是自主经营，长期不变。
Another beneficial policy, still not in existence in the interior, was implemented in Tibet.
工商这个免税和这个农业贴息，这个呢，在中国的推广也不过差2年，这2年的事情。那么西藏走在全国20多年前，早在20多年前就实施了。
From that time on, all the farmers and herdsmen in the Tibet Autonomous Region lived and worked in peace. Development had greatly improved. The central government also adhered to beneficial policies, and today, the people in Tibet still benefit from these policies. What's being shown now is part of a documentary shot by Central Newsreel and Documentary Film Studio.
1982年，洛桑旺堆一家在承包的60多亩土地上收获粮油36000多斤，加上副业收入13000多元。1983年，收入增加到32000多元。他不仅成为日喀则地区有名的富裕户，而且是全江孜县第一个向国家出售1万斤粮的农户。
In the early 1980s, the entire Tibet Autonomous Region was on the road to recovery. Jiang Xiaoping was a journalist for China National Radio. It's impossible for him to forget the experience of making a recording at a school in a Tibetan village.
他们用整个一晚上的时间就一直从晚上一直到天亮了，一直在给我们唱歌和跳舞。我们那个时候用很简陋的，因为当时我是广播记者，我就录音机给录下他们的歌声。那确实感觉到自己也很兴奋，他们也特别高兴。这整个展示了这种80年代初期广大的藏族群众的那种心情。
Everyone who experienced it at the time could feel the entire Tibet Autonomous Region was in a happy mood. Since then, 30 years have passed. Nowadays, the Tibet Autonomous Region is prosperous and the Tibetan people are happy. If the democratic reform in the Tibet Autonomous Region in 1959 is considered its first rebirth, then the campaign to bring order out of chaos in the region in the 1980s is its second rebirth. This is the University of Tibet, the first actual comprehensive university in the history of Tibet. But 30 years ago, the beautiful campus was still a wasteland. Sawang Jimre is a famous Tibetology expert. He's also the first president of the University of Tibet. 24 years ago, he witnessed the establishment of Tibet University. At that time, it was among the famous 43 projects. The 43 projects were initiated during the Second Tibet Conference. 9 provinces and municipalities, including Beijing and Shanghai, were required to help boost construction in the Tibet Autonomous Region.
这个85年大学成立的前夕，85年6月份，就交给我们这个整个竣工，并且交给我们钥匙，是吧？里边的这个课桌板凳什么的，这个全部都有，包括窗帘都弄好了。所以呢，整个这个学校呢，它就很快，这个9月份成立新生入学的时候，教学楼这些都正常的运转。
Meanwhile, the Lhasa Hotel, another engineering marvel of the 43 projects, was built in 1985. It's still the most famous hotel in Lhasa. At the beginning of the reform and opening up process, there were no decent hotels in Lhasa. Without any actual infrastructure to back it up, the reform and opening up process would be nothing but hot air. Therefore, the 43 projects were expected to be completed as soon as possible and built in such a way as to showcase good quality. One section of the main structure of the Lhasa Hotel took only 7 days to build. That was regarded as a miracle on the plateau. The 43 projects, including Lhasa Hotel, Tibet Stadium, and Lhasa Theatre, were affectionately referred to by the local people as the 43 Pearls of the Plateau. Beyond infrastructure, the central government also invested a great amount of money in the 1980s to renovate a large number of Tibetan temples and relics. Moya Chukyi Gyetsen is a leading expert on the ancient architecture of Tibet. In the early 1980s, he was responsible for renovating several temples there. The Samya Monastery was one of them. The Samya Monastery was first built 1,200 years ago. An ancient Tibetan text describes it as marvelous and unique. But Maya's grainy video and single black and white photograph show something very different.
而且那个中间有个跨度，就是一个15米的一个净空，没有一根柱子。那个就是一个建筑上的比较一个奇迹，但是那个时候已经毁掉了。
Moya Chukye Gyunsen's work to restore the dome was made more difficult by the fact that he couldn't gain access to the inner structure. The pressure on Moyer Chukye Gyunsen was enormous. But it wasn't only the challenge of the project that was making life difficult for him. The fact was, no information was available about it. This is the certificate of a living Buddha. It was awarded to Moyer Chukye Gyunsen by Garsa Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture in Sichuan Province. At the age of 4, he was selected as the successor to the 13th Moyer living Buddha. He then became the 14th Moyer living Buddha. Ramucha Temple is located in Lhasa. In 1963, 11 young living Buddhas were chosen to study here. Chukye Gyunsen was one of them. He spent a happy and light-hearted time here. In 1967, Chukye was sent to a construction site in Shainan area as a laborer. It was this experience that sparked his interest in architecture.
虽然是辛苦一点吧，但是确实，你比如说我自己去石头去完了，我自己看，自己还可以享受一下。
At the end of the Cultural Revolution, Chukye Gyunsen joined a training class for construction workers. Since he was good at his studies and also fluent in Chinese and the Tibetan language, he was recruited by the Design Institute. When the Tibet Autonomous Region was embarking on various religious and ethnical policies, Chukye Gyunsen was given the chance to choose his career.
说你可以会正写，也可以会佛写，你怎么办？
Chukye Gyunsen finally chose his favorite, architecture. He thought his value could be fully expressed and he felt he could handle the response of it. Along with that responsibility, Chukye Gyunsen began working on the restoration of the Samye Monastery under difficult conditions. With some old video and photographs, he began searching similar architecture, as well as for guidance on how it looked in the past. He then finally completed the task. When the golden dome of the Samye Monastery began shining again, Chukye Gyunsen found it difficult to calm down.
从那个时候，好像我就是觉得我这一辈子一定要把这些研究、保护或者是就是维修这一方面，我从事这么一个工作，我觉得我好像。 就我活这个世上是好像是值得的，有这种感觉。
And now, Moyer Chukye Gyunsen has mastered the restoration of over 30 temples. In these rebuilt sites, Buddhists pray and monks cultivate sutra. As Chukye Gyunsen says, he promoted Buddha in his own unique way. Statistics show that from the 1980s, both the central and local government invested over 700 million yuan into renovating relics and temples such as the Samye Monastery. This is Norbulinka in Lhasa. Nowadays, people have easy access to Tibetan opera. The performance of King Gusar by local artists can also be seen. King Gusar is an epic that eulogizes a Tibetan hero named Gusar. It's the only living epic in the world. It's also the longest one. It's longer than the total of the world's top 5 epics. It's also regarded as the East's Homeric epic. However, King Gusar was handed down through performances, which made its preservation much more difficult. Jambian Getso has been studying the Tibetan epic King Gusar for nearly 3 decades. The work on rescuing and restoring the epic started in early 1980.
当时国家财政有很多困难，就是在那种情况下，中央统战部、国家民委、社科院都给我们拨充足的经费进行收集整理。
The interviewer here is Jambian Getso, and the interviewee is an elderly actor called Saba. At that time, actors such as Saba were nearly always elderly, so Jambian Getso made a vow.
人亡国息的那个时间，再不能在我们这个时代出现。
Now, Saba has passed away, but fortunately his performances were completely recorded. Thanks to the hard work by 3 generations, 300 chapters of King Gusar have been preserved. And Jambian Getso has kept his promise. The art form did not disappear in his time. And it's certain that this epic will last forever. Nian Xin is a camera journalist with Tibet television. He can now only do outdoor filming on fine days due to a leg injury. Nian Xin still remembers the day on October 1st, 1987. He got everything ready for filming, but as he was about to leave, a colleague stopped him.
我车已经快要发动了，就是我们4个人一块都已经要马上走的时候呢，突然来把我们拦住了，说我们直奔大昭寺。我就跟说大昭寺干什么去？
Nian Xin was shocked by what he witnessed at Jokhang Temple. It was the first unrest that had occurred in Lhasa since 1959. It was reported that the Dalai group had directly planned and instigated this turbulence. 1 year earlier, in Dharamsala, India, the Dalai had declared during a Tibetan Youth Congress that provoking Lhasa is equal to provoking Tibet. So we should set Lhasa as our base to revolt against the Communist Party. 6 months prior to the unrest, the Dalai group held a high-level conference to make arrangements for the turbulence in Lhasa. After the conference, the Tibetan Youth Congress sent people to hand out leaflets advocating an independent Tibet. On October 1st, the premeditated rioting began. Nian Xin quickly climbed onto a rooftop to take pictures of the unrest. They soon witnessed the parade deteriorating into a chaotic situation. They needed to find a shelter to keep filming, and Nian Xin quickly found one.
就在另外的一个小院子的这个楼上一个房子，一进去以后我们把门关掉了，关着以后呢，窗子下面就是那个大昭寺门口，我们把那窗子上那个雨布撕开以后把镜头对着就拍。
The turbulence intensified. Not only houses and cars, but innocent passengers were also attacked. Unfortunately, Nian Xin and his colleagues were also found by rioters.
那些人一进来一看，说你是电视台的，干什么？我说我们来看看。说你肯定是不是来看的？哎呀，那些人就打起来了。打的时候，哎呀，有些人拿棒子拿我的腿上打，打到我的腰上，完了以后就很疼。
Nian Xin and his colleagues found themselves surrounded by rioters. Their lives were in danger.
当然，这个里面呢有好的喇嘛，有认识的喇嘛，他们就说把我推这个意思，我就明白了，就是把我推出去叫我跑。
Nian Xin planned to continue filming after he was out of danger, but unfortunately, he discovered he'd been injured.
哎呀，我一看到我的腰不行了，腰疼得不得了。后来呢，我一接受了小便里面有血，就是说伤得肾了嘞。这两个腿呢确实肿得很大，这个腿上呢捏的话呢响，就好像是里头什么东西坏了，感觉最后说是半月板打碎了。
This is the picture of Lhasa after the disturbances. It looks as if it's a war zone. It's difficult for many to imagine that all of this damage was instigated by the Dalai Lama, who declared himself peaceful and non-violent. After the Dalai group fled to India in 1959, they established a so-called government in exile in Dharamsala and declared themselves independent. And so, at this base, they've been conducting separatist activities ever since. Their initial strategy was to attack China's border from Nepal. However, after the Cold War had finished in the middle of the 1980s, peace and development had become the emerging trend. Deftly adapting to changing times, the Dalai Lama repackaged himself as a human rights defender. Nowadays, from declassified documents from the US Foreign Ministry, we can discover who taught the Dalai Lama the term human rights. That person was John Foster Dulles, the US Secretary of State during the 1950s.
他跑到美国去，要求独立，美国要和台湾当局商量，商量的结果，杜勒斯在一次会议上说，因为西藏许多年就是中国的一部分，所以我们认为现在西藏问题从人权的角度来提更加有利。
On September 21st, 1987, the Dalai Lama delivered a speech to the US Congressional Human Rights Caucus. He unveiled his so-called 5-point peace plan, which directly triggered the turbulence in Lhasa 9 days later. The content of the plan seeks an independent Tibet via some neutral way. But no matter how the Dalai Lama tried to change his tone and image, his final purpose was to split China. Between 1987 and 1989, the Dalai clique organized 18 disturbances in the Tibet Autonomous Region.
由达赖集团煽动策划的这场破坏骚乱活动，一直发展到1989年3月5日，分裂主义分子在拉萨肆意打砸抢烧，使用枪支袭击我们的干警。3月8日，中央果断决定在拉萨实行戒严，迅速平息了事态。
Faced with a turbulent situation, Hu Jintao was assigned to the post of Party Secretary of the Tibet Autonomous Region. Hu Jintao gradually formed clear guidelines after conducting extensive research and investigation into the situation in the Tibet Autonomous Region. During that time, two people could often be seen taking a walk after lunch in the courtyard of the Regional Party Committee. They were Party Secretary Hu Jintao and Deputy Secretary Ray D.
金涛同志这个决策非常慎重，针对当时干部群众思想比较混乱，很多人对西藏自治区领导层和自治区停居部委办的领导班子有意见，要求进行调整等等。 金涛同志呢对我说，咱们要多换思想，少换人，稳定局势、安定人心是第一位的。
On October 19th, 1989, the Political Bureau Standing Committee of the CPC Central Committee listened to Hu Jintao's report regarding the stability and development of the Tibet Autonomous Region.
原定的这个会议只开1个上午，后来江泽民同志说，西藏工作很重要。今天的这个会议涉及到许多重大问题，我们要好好研究一下，下午继续开。
The meeting began in the morning and lasted all day. Finally, a summary of the meeting was formed.
也就是著名的中央关于西藏工作的10条意见，对西藏工作的成绩和问题、干部队伍的建设、依靠对象、民族宗教和统一战线工作、经济建设、边防建设、拉萨骚乱的性质和对象等重大问题，做了系统、科学、精辟的分析，提出了符合西藏实际、鲜明正确的指导思想。
Later, based on that, Hu Jintao raised some other thoughts. They were called 1 central task, 2 big affairs, 3 guarantees. These meant that economic construction was the central task. The economy and stability were the 2 big affairs. The 3 guarantees included rapid economic growth and overall social progress, national security and Tibet's long-term stability, and improvements of the standard of living of all ethnic groups in Tibet. By the end of the 1980s, even though there was still some harassment from the Dalai Group, the Tibet Autonomous Region rapidly recovered under the guidelines, and religious as well as ethnic development was on the right track. This is the home of Nawang Damba in Doilang Duchin County, Lhasa. Whenever guests visit, the hostess Pasang will show them a quartz clock, which is very meaningful to her. Back in July 1990, the then President Jiang Zemin visited the Tibet Autonomous Region. He wanted to investigate how the Tibet Autonomous Region was developing in the market economy society. Jiang Zemin visited Nawang Damba's home, chatted with her family, and before he left, presented her with a quartz clock as a souvenir. Although that was nearly 20 years ago, Pasang still treasures the quartz clock. She says it's the best gift she's ever received. With the information Jiang Zemin brought back from his tour, the central government formed new guidelines for the development of the Tibet Autonomous Region. In July 1994, the third Working Conference on Tibet was held in Beijing. The conference made important decisions on the national support to Tibet. Over 3 billion yuan was allocated to build 62 projects in Tibet.
到94年，西藏的改革开放进入到第2个时期。这个时期呢，有这么几个重大的变化。第一个，就把西藏这个特殊的民族地区放在了国家的一个非常重要的位置上加以对待的。这个江总书记在这个第三次西藏工作座谈会一开门就讲，西藏的稳定牵涉到全国的稳定，西藏的发展牵涉到全国的发展，就把这个西藏的问题看得，实际上就如何对待西藏，就放在全国这个大局上来进行。
Tibet, is to national reform as the ballast is to a ship. Only when Tibet is stable can the ships sail well. So other provinces are also responsible for supporting Tibet so that it can keep pace with the nation's path of development. This is the National Geographic Information Center. They regularly receive pictures from satellites and then conduct research into China's geography and geology. This is a satellite image of the Brahmaputra Basin in the Tibet Autonomous Region. It caused some confusion for many researchers at first because they couldn't understand what the white images were until local villagers explained.
这个就是一个蔬菜大棚的一个情况。这个蔬菜大棚是前几年的这个卫星影像上所没有的。
Nowadays, vegetable greenhouses such as those found in the satellite picture are everywhere in Shigaza, Shannan, and Lhasa. And vegetables in the Tibet Autonomous Region can be self-supported. In prior times, though, Lhasa and other cities were often lacking in vegetables, and people still remember this.
从哪去买啊？说这菜在哪啊？
那么在我们的每个宿舍前面都有一块地，你都必须要种菜，否则你没有吃的。
从成都买的大包小包装上各种蔬菜，这个家分上一把，那一家给上一点，那是最好的礼物了。
哎呀，那真是比拿到什么都高兴，就是看到那种绿油油的那个非常鲜灵的那种颜色了。
Nowadays, in every vegetable market, it's easy to see many kinds of fresh vegetables, similar to many parts of the interior areas. Tibet has special natural conditions. In prior times, only specific crops, such as highland barley and potato, were produced. But the Brahmaputra project totally changed this situation. The Brahmaputra is considered the mother river of Tibet. It's also considered its most important breadbasket. But limited by environmental and production conditions, agriculture developed slowly here. The middle reaches of the river, along with its tributaries Lhasa River and Nyangchu River, form a valley. Beginning in 1991, the central government initiated a project to develop the area. For example, a diversion project provided many arid areas with drinking and irrigation water, and the area that once was marked by drought now has become fertile farmland. Now, greenhouses make it possible for vegetables and fruits to grow on the anoxic plateau. The project is a great example of long-term engineering. It not only improves people's lives, but also is changing their attitudes. They're now very positive, rather than negative. There's still a long way to go, but at least the Tibet Autonomous Region has made its first step. Jia Yang used to be the director of the restoration department at Potala Palace. Now, walking around Potala Palace has become part of his life. The Potala Palace is located at an altitude of over 3,700 meters. It also occupies over 360,000 square meters, making it the highest and largest group of palaces in the world. The Potala Palace is also a special sanctuary for Tibetan people, and many consider it the symbol of Tibet. From its construction in 1645, it had never experienced any major renovation in the following 300 years. Jia Yang can still clearly remember what the Potala Palace looked like when he took charge of the maintenance job over 20 years ago.
墙的话呢，也是这个，就是说，开始这个已经裂开了，裂开了以后呢，甚至你可以把这个整个手都可以进去。
Eventually, the moment that Jia Yang was longing for finally came. On October 11, 1989, the first phase of the project began. Because the Potala Palace was made of wood, the first difficulty they faced was bristletail.
这个蛀虫到什么程度呢？这个已经成了这个像这个粉面一样。这个一个船子，你要是抓一把的话呢，它就可以，这个粉就像那个面一样，一棍子一捅上去，整个这个船子也好，大脸也好，那就是整个就粉就可以掉下来。
To keep the original appearance of the relics during the restoration process, they tried not to use new wood. The humidity of new wood was seriously limited due to antisepsis, and old wood was processed with medicament. Statistics showed the process of wood rotting took over 1 year, costing several million yuan. The frescoes of the Potala Palace exhibited various themes and could best display Tibetan history. They were also treasures of Chinese ethnic arts. By the time restoration began, some frescoes had already been badly destroyed due to their long history. To get better results, Jia Yang invited experienced technicians from Danhuang Academy to help. The technicians and local craftsmen worked together using many kinds of techniques, especially for repairing cracks, cleaning dirt, filling slurry, and other challenging tasks. The problems were eventually solved. It's estimated that up to nearly 1,723 square meters of frescoes in the Potala Palace were restored. That accounts for 68% of all the frescoes there. The second phase of the restoration will be finished in 2009, and then Potala Palace will be healthy for the next 50 years. The total restoration project will take about 12 years and cost over 220 million yuan. The final result is an ethnic treasure of extraordinary splendor. Jia Yang not only witnessed but was part of the restoration of Potala Palace. From a vigorous middle-aged man to an elderly man, he has devoted some of the best years of his life to Potala Palace. He says this is the one thing that he's most proud of in his life. In 2001, Hu Jintao, then China's vice president, brought a gift from the central government to the Tibet Autonomous Region: the Cauldron of National Solidarity. On many occasions, including some of the most critical moments in history, it has stood as a symbol of profound friendship among people of different ethnic groups. In the winter of 1997, a disastrous snowstorm swept through the northern Tibet grassland. It lasted nearly 8 months, adversely affecting nearly the entire Nagchu area. Transportation was blocked, communication was interrupted, and the people in Nagchu were in dire straits. When the disaster struck, the central government immediately dispatched a large number of rescue troops to the disaster area. In the meantime, many journalists arrived on the scene. Wang Du from China National Radio was one of them.
冻到什么程度？狼、羊、藏羚羊，甚至野牛都在挤在一起。 沉到这个地方。本来这三头都不行的，你这个狼的话肯定要吃羊的，而且这个野牛也是很大，回复很大的，它都冻到这个程度，那何况人呢
？Gamma was a member of the Nangchu Chinese Communist Party committee, and she was with one of the rescue teams. They were heading to Chazawoma village in Nyarong County, one of the most remote villages. But before long, the rescue team found themselves trapped by the snowstorm.
被子和这个墙站到一块了，结冰结都站到一块了，就拔不开了。
Even though time was passing, heavy snow continued to fall. The experience was mentally and physically draining and exhausting for the rescue team members.
那我们部队很多的耳朵冻了的、脚冻了的、手冻了的，那是说不清楚的。这虽然没人管，说是你冻了，你休息一下，没人说这个。那大家都是理所当然的，根本就不在意那种。只要你有一口气，只要你能走，只要你能说话，那就是要干，要走。
After 15 days' hard work, the road was finally cleared. But what kind of days and nights did they go through?
将近半个月，根本就这个晚上车上坐几个小时，基本上坐的时间长了也冻死了，根本就不能坐得太久，还得要走，所以基本上就半个月就没有他们休息过。
When the rescue team finally reached the victims in the village, they didn't have words to describe how they felt. Everybody expressed their emotions in the same way.
那哭啊，都是拥抱在哭啊。说实在是，这个眼泪是控制不住的。你管他认不认识，不是这个问题了，那就是大家都一个目的达到了以后，有个共同的愿望，实现这个目的，而实现这个时候呢，那大家的这种心情激动啊，那可是真的不是这个我从这个语言来能够表达清楚的问题。 当时这个感人的场面。
A miracle had happened in Nangchu. During the unusually severe snowstorm, not a single person had starved or frozen to death. And because of the hard work and outside support from others, Nangchu recovered to its pre-snowstorm level in just 2 years. Entering the new century in 2001, the people in the Tibet Autonomous Region welcomed the 50th anniversary of Tibet's peaceful liberation. That same year witnessed the central government's 4th Working Conference on Tibet in Beijing. Participants at the meeting decided to extend aid to the Tibet Autonomous Region for 10 more years, investing 37 billion yuan in building 117 major projects. And between 1995, when the supporting project for the Tibet Autonomous Region began, through the end of 2008, supporters have included 18 provinces and municipalities, as well as more than 60 national departments and 17 state-owned enterprises. It's been 30 years since the Tibet Autonomous Region's reform and opening up. Clinging to the heart of the motherland, the Tibet Autonomous Region is now on the fast track of social progress and economic development. The people of Tibet have transformed their mental outlook, and their attitudes have undergone profound changes. The Tibet Autonomous Region is experiencing a period in history when the separatist activities of the Dalai clique are constantly failing. As the 21st century begins a new millennium, the development of Tibet in southwest China is gearing up for what many hope and believe will be its brightest and best days.